Do not repeat the tactics which have gained you one victory, but let your methods be regulated by infinite variety of circumstances. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. This quote has basically nothing to do with the video. Analog horror. For the past couple of years, people have been conveying their unique horror stories through the medium of analog technology. Whether it be through actual old VHS tapes or just the medium of the CRT screen, this format has exploded in popularity and found its spot in the pantheon of horror genres. Personally, I've been enjoying a lot of analog horror lately, particularly the stories of Morley Grove, The Man in the Suit, and Vita Carnis, among others. Although they definitely have their flaws, they're stories that I find to have a good balance between being disturbing and interesting. Now, even if you have just a passing interest in analog horror like I do, then there's a pretty good chance that you've heard of a little series called The Painter, or as it's more known as, UrbanSPOok. At a surface level, this series appears to be pretty popular and well liked, with the channel having close to 100,000 subscribers and most of the videos having a pretty positive like to dislike ratio. However, if you search for this series on YouTube, you will notice a plethora of videos alongside it criticizing UrbanSPOok, with a large portion of them straight up calling it the worst analog horror they've ever seen, or something along those lines. When I saw this, I must admit, it piqued my interest. What could a simple little horror story have done to rile so many people up? And then I watched it for myself, and just...
This is the most obnoxious thing I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah, this series is pretty much the analog horror equivalent to that weird hyper-realistic blood phase that the creepypasta trend went through near its end. If you even want to call it that, by the way, analog horror is pretty generous for what this is. The first episode of UrbanSPOok starts off by informing us that 6 months ago, 3 paintings were found in a storage unit by police, each named after recent murders. We then get descriptions of the murders alongside the accompanying paintings. I won't explain the methods of murder for each episode, but it is extremely important to note that the vast majority of the crimes that occur in this series are extremely brutal and detailed, usually to a point that is excessive for my personal taste, but it would otherwise be fine in moderation in a story about murderers. The first victim was stabbed 36 times in the face and had all of her teeth removed. The second was stabbed 27 times in the gooch, which if you don't know what that is, click off the video, you're way too young to be watching this. And then she was drowned in a bathtub. And lastly, the third had their face removed and their wrists were sliced open. Already, this seems just the tiniest bit heavy, but don't worry, it gets worse. Anyways, 2 months later, the police found 7 more paintings, of which I would like you to take note of this one. I know the first bit is censored, but it is exactly what you think it is, unfortunately. The police then received 3 photos in the mail, not paintings, which is fine for now as the first 2 photos look fine enough, but the photo gimmick becomes rather confusing as the series goes on, as weirdly enough, they slowly start to look more like the paintings than anything. Lastly, a painting is found titled Self-Portrait, which, you guessed it, already shows us what one of the killers looks like. Yes, you heard me right, one of them, but we'll get to that later.
Fortnite.
The second episode is more of the same. A cop and his family go missing, and the police search his house for clues and find what I can only describe as a Baby Yuto moment.
Holy fuck, now it's actually hanging.
They find a painting of the, mind you, 2-year-old baby inside the family van, which has ended up on a beach. They search a nearby lighthouse and find 3 more bodies, 2 of which were mentioned in the previous episode, and then find a barrel full of the missing members of the cop's family mixed with some yummy drugs. Next to the barrel is a really bad looking set of photos, and then a picture of the main killer yet again, and then the episode ends. Noticing a pattern yet? Now, if you haven't watched the series yourself, so far you may be wondering what had people so up in arms, well, besides the whole baby thing. And this is the start of that.
I love kids, Charlie! I love kids!
Pim, I would really not be screaming that at the top of your lungs.
Episode 3 starts out by informing us that 10 days ago, 2 twins went missing. Now, if you're paying close attention, you'll notice that one of the twins shares a name with the painting that I pointed out from the first episode. And yes, it is as bad as you think. And unfortunately, it only gets worse. The police find half of each twin's body sewn together crudely, stating that the girl had died from having a brick shoved down her throat. And the boy, Corey, was castrated via a pulling force. Okay, I was trying to save my criticisms for the last bit of the video so I could knock them out all at once, but I physically cannot stop myself from being genuinely annoyed by this part of the episode. Now, in case you haven't put 2 and 2 together, Corey, the boy, had most likely been taken advantage of in the moments leading to his death. Why this detail was necessary is absolutely beyond me. Now, I am a firm believer that you can involve kids in horror and have it be completely fine. I also believe that you can tackle heavy subject matter such as what happened to Corey so long as you meet 2 conditions. 1, It is respectful and shows care for how truly devastating of an impact something like that can have, as it is, unfortunately, a fairly common source of trauma. And 2, it has to service the story. The rest of the story physically could not have happened without the assault happening, or it serves to demonstrate a point. Some good examples of stories where this happens and is handled with care that come to mind for me personally are Invincible, Oyasumi Punpun, and Fallout New Vegas, specifically the missions I Don't Hurt Anymore and 3-Card Bounty. With these examples specifically, although they vary widely in the manner in which they actually demonstrate the assault, they all share one thing in common. That being that the author is using the event in which it occurs to further the story and inform the audience of just how hard something like that can be to deal with, and how devastating and uncomfortable it can be, not only in the moment, but also for the rest of a victim's life. Urban Spook does none of this. Corey's assault is played off for purely shock factor and literally nothing more. It is never mentioned again, and it ultimately has no effect on the outcome of the story. It is without a doubt absolutely the shittiest way to include something like that in your story, made even worse by the fact that Urban Slug, the creator of Urban Spook, used to sell $30 t-shirts with the painting depicting Corey's assault. Yes, you heard me right, I am not even baiting. What's worse is the fact that they initially doubled down on the shirt being sold and the inclusion of child rape happening in this series, labeling anybody who would call them out on it as an autistic furry.
Look, Pim, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause.
I have a lot more that I could say about this, but for the sake of getting through the summary, I will hold off until later in the video. It truly sucks too, because after this, there is a legitimately really cool part of the series immediately following the stupid edgy bullshit. We learned that a week prior to his disappearance, Corey was dared by his friends to go into a cabin in the woods, in which he survived a close encounter with the killer, albeit after being bruised pretty badly. Corey's camera was found inside, and we get a pretty cool sequence with a really well done picture of the killer's face in my opinion. It's moments like this that make me really sad about Urban Spook, because its creator very obviously has talent, and is working to refine their craft, as we slowly get to see more sequences like this as the story progresses. But ultimately, it is overshadowed by the stupid, unnecessary, edgy shock value shit.
Michael! Don't leave me here!
Episode 4 has nothing really of importance for the most part. A cop finds a victim, who weirdly enough had his arms cut off and was suffocated in a pile of wax, not too dissimilar to the fate of many UrbanSPOOK figures. The cop goes missing, the police then investigate his house, only to discover that the killer broke all of the cop's dog's limbs, because yeah, that's necessary. They then discover a bloody number 2 written in the cop's blood. It is here that we learn that there are 2 killers, but the series, for whatever reason, decides to pretend that we didn't learn this here until literally the end of the series so far. Weird choice, but whatever. The police find a painting of the missing cop titled The Man in the Pipes, which I'm only pointing out here because for whatever fucking reason, the cops never put 2 and 2 together that their missing cop comrade is literally inside the pipes in his wall. This is never followed up on for whatever reason, and we're just supposed to forget about this. Because what is good writing? Anyways, the cops find out that the guy had a Ring doorbell or something, and we get our first glimpse at the second killer.
So, back in the day, jingle, jingle, jingle.
In episode 5, the same thing as always happens. A family goes missing, they find the family's van, one of the sisters is alive, one of them's dead, as well as the first sister's boyfriend. For whatever reason, this episode shows us the most realistic photo that we get to see in the whole series so far, and it is literally of a woman's head smashed with a hammer. So thanks for that. The alive sister tells the cops that the killer is still in the woods somewhere, but of course they don't find him. Yet despite searching for him, they somehow completely miss the moment in which he drive-by drops off a painting at the van of the boyfriend. The survivor gives a description of the event to the cops, and we get a police sketch of the first killer, which doesn't matter at this point because it's like the 15th time seeing the dude.
I know a guy in heaven who was filled by a horse once.
In case any of you thought that Urban Slug would stop including sexual topics in the painter without purpose following the criticism from episode 3, you would, unfortunately, be dead wrong. Episode 6 starts out, and we learn that a cop and his family go missing again. They search their barn and find out that the killer made the cop's wife experience what I can only refer to as an Enumclaw Washington moment for the sake of not being blown up by YouTube. In case it wasn't obvious already, this feels like a direct response from Urban Slug to all of the criticism from episode 3. Basically is one big fuck you to anybody who dared to call out their masterpiece. It really gives me the vibes of the creator of Sonic.exe whenever their shit-ass story was removed from the creepypasta wiki. But that's besides the point. Anyways, they randomly bring in the couple's granddaughter as a victim, discover a bunch of heads in the barn, and then stumble upon the cop's body stuffed into the corpse of a pig who, mind you, had its eyes carved out and replaced by the granddaughter's eyes. They go into some random room, find a bunch more paintings, which means yippee, more edgelord content, alongside a VHS containing a bad painting that Urban Slug tries to pass off as the second killer moving in front of the camera.
Sounds like someone breaking in!
An elementary teacher calls the cops in the middle of one of the crimes and gives them the wrong address for whatever reason. The cops then go to that address and discover the bodies of a family who was expecting a child in the future. Because why not? It's also worth mentioning that the killers cut out the fetus from the mother, fed it to the father, sewed his mouth shut, and strangled the mother with the umbilical cord. But I guess that's just how low we've sunk. Oh, and their actually grown kid just isn't alive anymore. We don't learn what happens to him. They find a painting and go over to investigate the actual address of the elementary teacher. They find out that she and her husband were dead, discover a bunch of shitty poetry that was embedded into her head, and discover 2 sets of footprints in the crime scene, which were barefoot, by the way, for some reason. So only now do the cops start to believe that there are 2 killers, even though we learned this 3 episodes ago at this point. Lastly, we get to hear a surprisingly really well acted 911 call from the teacher, which is absolutely the highlight of the entire series. Props to you, Urban Slug. You're actually capable of creating something that isn't slop when you don't feel like throwing excessive bullshit around.
Fall.
Oh boy, we got a lot to cover with this one, so I'll try to make it quick. A doctor goes missing, and the cops show up and find him with his face sanded off, a bunch of Viagra around the house, cause why not, and evidence that his cat got the Shane Dawson treatment. Oh, and I guess the neighbors heard a dog even though he didn't own one, so that's neat. 2 days later, another guy dies with probably the most excessive murder yet. The guy's face had been cut off, he had been stabbed 487 times, the killers definitely said "hear me out" to some of the wounds in his body, and they stuffed photos in him like a fucked up piñata. Go figure, the photos look like shit, and then we move on to our next victims. A cop couple goes missing, they look on the couple's Ring doorbell camera, again, and we get some shitty paintings that are attempted to be passed off as footage. We pan to a stairwell, and the video ends. And that is the end of The Painter. So far. The formula for The Painter is notably very repetitive. Insert amount of time ago, some people go missing, the cops find a scene that would get me demonetized on YouTube, and then some paintings, and you rinse and repeat that a couple times. They then find some photos or a video or some shit, and then evidence of the killer's face, and then the video ends. That is more or less how every single episode of the series goes, with the exception being episode 5, The Witness, which happens to be my favorite in the series, although it still isn't very good. I personally believe that a little bit more variety in the formula would go a long way in making the series feel not so stale, especially when Urban Slug stated that they only wanted the series to end up being 10 episodes long, and we are currently on episode 8. A break from just straight up ultraviolence and gore would be much appreciated occasionally. Oh yeah, speaking of ultraviolence,
I think I miss my wife.
holy shit, it cannot be stated enough just how much the ultraviolence in The Painter is an active detriment to the series. Horror is all about subtlety. That's why in a good horror movie, they usually refrain from showing us the main threat in broad daylight until either the end of the movie or they just don't show us at all. UrbanSPOOK does none of this. The violence is so out there and in your face that you do not get a single moment of it being scary, but rather, oh hey, that's a lot of stab wounds or some bullshit like that. In fact, let's go to the numbers. There are 37 victims that we get told of in The Painter, 5 of which are kids, or I guess 38 victims if you want to count the fetus, cause that's fun. We get shown a total of 30 paintings and 10 photos of the victims throughout The Painter, some of which haven't happened yet, so yay, I'm sure we're gonna get more Painter content soon. In total, there are 550 stab wounds, 3 instances of somebody's face being removed, 2 decapitations, 7 amputations, 4 violations, 2 cases of being hidden in the walls of some sort, 1 burning, 1 smashing with a hammer, 1 drilling, 2 suffocations via wax and a fetus, 2 strangulations, 1 brick, 9 miscellaneous deaths, and a partridge in a pear tree. All of these are without including victims that have been shown to us only in the paintings or photos, so it's safe to say that there will be more to come. On average, there is 1 kill for every minute of The Painter, which might seem like a lot, and that's because it is. Furthermore, even though there are only 3 victims of stabbings in The Painter, because of Urban Slug's need to make every single kill super over the top, we end up with an average of 16 stab wounds per minute of UrbanSPOOK's runtime. Can you maybe see how the need to make the content as gory as possible ruins the integrity of the series? When you take something as serious as murder and you sensationalize literally every single kill in your series, it goes from something that could have been very legitimately cool and scary to something that the average viewer will find themselves rolling their eyes at with each increasingly ridiculous kill. While we're on the topic of ultraviolence in The Painter, I just wanted to talk about Urban Slug's use of children in the plot of UrbanSPOOK.
Do not diddle kids, it's no good diddling kids.
Now, as I said before, including children in horror should not be prevented, as it can be a very disturbing footnote in a good horror story. Hell, the most popular horror franchise of the last decade is literally about a guy who murders children and stuffs them inside robots for fun. Or well, I guess it was until whatever the hell security breaches. Urban Slug, however, does not put any care into this and instead just decides to throw child deaths and infanticide in the story as a, hey, look at how cool and edgy I am. I'm willing to kill children in my story. I've already said my gripes about how Corey's death was handled, but literally every other child's death in the series is just randomly thrown in out of nowhere, with little to no hinting at it going on prior to Urban Slug just straight up informing us of the death itself. Let's compare this to an actually good analog horror series, Vita Carnis. Vita Carnis takes place in a world that has been taken over by a bunch of meat creatures known as the Vita Carnis. Throughout the series, we only get a glimpse of a couple of deaths, mostly by the hands of creatures called the Mimics, which are freaky as hell by the way. But the most important and downright bone-chilling deaths that we see in the series come in the episode Species Anomaly Report. In this episode, we witness the death of a child after he steps into a harvester, which is a Vita Carnis species that lays vines underground, which, when stepped on, inject the victim with a venom that melts their flesh off their bodies on the spot. We, as the viewers, are subjected to every single second of the child's agony, and once it is done, we are forced to go through it again when the child's mother discovers his body after hearing his screams. It is an absolutely harrowing moment in a series full of disturbing scenes, but it is one moment that hits harder than literally any scene in the entirety of The Painter purely because it is a moment that is played entirely straight, not just for shock value, and it includes some absolutely stellar voice acting and visuals for a low-budget analog horror. On top of that, it hits so hard because of the restraint that Vita Carnis had showed prior to this. Again, the only kills that we had seen in the series up to this point had all been from the Mimics, and there were only a couple of them in 2 separate videos. So to have an episode of the series come out with one of the seemingly most innocuous species claiming 2 lives in the most violent way that we've seen so far, it really hits the viewer because you were truly not expecting something like this in a series that is otherwise mostly death-free. And now you might be saying, oh, well that's just one example. Wrong. Here's another. In the 2019 film Dr. Sleep, which I would wholeheartedly recommend by the way, there is a scene in which the main villains, the True Knot, kidnap a kid, torture him for several minutes, and then kill him. Again, we are subjected to the whole thing, and again, it is instantly more impactful than anything The Painter has to offer. Now, you could make the point that both of these examples have the advantage in the fact that they have actual acting behind them, and while that is true for the most part, these two are not better purely because of the acting that is present. They are better because of the impact that they have and the care with which they are handled. These events are both incredibly disturbing moments in the series, used to demonstrate the true evil present in both series antagonists. The seriousness of these events are literally never lost on the audience. This is in stark contrast to The Painter, which throws in child murder so casually that it almost seems like a talking point rather than an actual heinous crime to Urban Slug. Urban Slug's need to tack child murder and assault onto the seemingly never-ending list of crimes that the killers commit out of nowhere ends up completely nullifying the seriousness of the moment, leaving what could have been a stomach-turning, gut-wrenching event into nothing more than something that the viewers will groan at. It's something that Urban Slug has demonstrated they could do a lot better, as seen with the sequence where they show Corey's first encounter with the killer, but it sadly never exceeded that quality or even approached it again in the first place. You would think going into a series called The Painter that the art would easily be the best part of the series, but again, you would be wrong. The art in The Painter is very strangely inconsistent. Some of the photos look like paintings, some of the photos look like shit, some of the paintings look like photos, some of the paintings look like shit. Like, look at these 2 pictures and tell me which one is supposed to be the painting and which one is supposed to be the photo. I'll give you a second to guess. If you pick the one on the left, then you'd be correct. The painting, by the way, is titled Breeding Mount May, which, if you'll recall, was the woman who got the Mr. Hands treatment. What's even better is the fact that you can buy a t-shirt of a woman who got fucked to death by a stallion for $30 on Urban Slug's website. Why? I have no goddamn clue. Complete side note, by the way, who the actual hell is buying these? There clearly must be a market for them, otherwise they wouldn't sell them. But how the hell would you actually explain to somebody that, oh, this little thing? It's supposed to be a picture of Daniel after the fire? What does that mean? I don't fucking know, go along with it. Anyways, back on track. Even ignoring the fact that some of the photos look like paintings, the craziest part of the art in The Painter is just how inconsistent it is. You can tell that Urban Slug likes experimenting with styles, which, more power to you, that takes a lot of effort. But in a series called The Painter, a little bit of consistency would be appreciated. In fact, I'm about 98% sure that Urban Slug created the twist that there are 2 killers purely to explain away the inconsistent art style. If you'll recall, we only saw the second killer for the first time in the 4th episode, and by then, there had already been plenty of examples of Urban Slug's art style varying greatly in quality up to that point. So I believe that when faced with the piling problem of his art style, he decided to just go ahead and add a second killer to avoid having to correct it in the future. But hey, that's just a theory. Never mind. This is a more personal gripe that I have with this series, but I personally really don't get the choice to show the killer immediately. Whenever the first painting had been shown of him, I thought, oh hey, that's pretty cool. You can have the killer lie about what he looks like, and it'll create like a cool, like unreliable narrator sort of thing. But no, that's just straight up what the killer looks like. And then even whenever Urban Slug introduces the second killer, we just get to see straight up what he looks like. Why? What the hell's the point of that? Also, that last bit of the series where it's supposed to be like footage of the killers, it has this really weird, almost Amazing World of Gumball look because the killers are very obviously painted on a background that is trying to look realistic. So it just looks very weird and they look really disproportionate in my opinion. Plus, the first killer looks really fucking goofy and the second one has a big ass forehead. So that's pretty funny. Overall, The Painter stands as easily the worst of the analog horror genre in my opinion. It is senseless, cynical edgelord bait made by a person who most likely wanted to piss as many people off after a certain point following the negative reactions to their series, and also sell a bunch of t-shirts in the process. If that was the intent, then congratulations to them. They have succeeded in prodding at least one of those things for me, unfortunately. It is truly unfortunate just how much talent and potential were wasted on the series purely because its creator prioritized making the crimes gory as opposed to actually scary or well fleshed out. Urban Slug's insistence on including senseless, over-the-top violence instead of violence with a purpose dooms the series to be nothing more than gore porn. So yeah, if you want a good analog horror series, go watch The Mandela Catalog or Vita Carnis or Local 58 or something. I don't fucking know anymore. That being said, please do not harass the creator of the series. They'll probably call you an autistic furry or something, so it's not worth it anyways. So yeah, if you enjoyed this sort of content, make sure to leave a like or subscribe. It's something I'm trying to experiment more with and improve with. Hell, this video alone went through about 8 hours of writing and 2 separate drafts because the first actual draft was just me molding for half an hour. So yeah, if you want to support me, make sure to like or subscribe. And if you have any thoughts, make sure to leave them in the comments because for whatever reason, YouTube likes it when people comment on my videos. If you are interested, we have a Discord server in the link in the description below that you are more than welcome to join. And if you'd like more content, make sure to go check out my other stuff. I know that it's mostly gaming stuff, but if you enjoy my yapping style, it is present in literally every single video of mine. Anyways, that's enough yapping for now. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye!